going to talk for a minute here about just using PHP Unit and how one can use PHP Unit to test against an HTTP REST style API. In the example, simply because I happen to know a lot about the subject and am in the process of working on it, like as we speak, we're going to be talking about integrating with MJ Freeway, Leaf Data, possibly talking about integrating with Friendometric and maybe even some BioTrack, but I've been spending a lot of time with Leaf Data MJ Freeway product lately, and so it's at the top of my mind, like I say. PHP Unit is actually pretty darn simple, and we've got a little wrapper script for running the business, and I've got, let's see, a little config file I can show you that looks like it doesn't have any secrets in it. Well, oops, I'm wrong about that. So we'll just, I'll figure something out on that. And then I got a bunch of test cases I can show, of course. They're pretty boring stuff and, kind of just outline kind of organization of a test structure, and then what a bunch of tests would look like, and maybe a good way of running through those kinds of things. Let's see. Oh, and I guess I'll just hide myself here for a minute and we can look at, this is a test case that I ran pretty recently. Runs through a bunch of things. You can see I've got some sort of organizational structure going on here. These are the class names of the test case files, and I commonly, when I just have a couple of fire tests or easy ones for whatever that means, I just name them in a class called alpha. It's the alpha test, like does it pass, smoke test or something clever like this. In fact, because I'm in the cannabis industry, maybe I'm going to change all of my first tests to smoke instead of alpha. That's funnier. And here's another one, another similar output for another product that has a whole bunch of these things organized. It looks like this one I've still been a little inconsistent with some of the naming scheme, and this report is produced by taking the PHP unit file output that's XML, and then you run it through an XSLT transform, and it turns it into all of this tidy stuff. It's good reports. You can dive right in and definitely drill down to write exactly where the problem is. This is a test case for test alpha. It's extending this bunk leaf data test case that we have that is just a wrapper class with some convenience methods on it. Most of the configuration parameters we've put in the environment variable that's set through the PHP config file. So each time one of these things has to do it, it can simply use something from the config. We don't have to change it everywhere. And this is a very brief test. Make sure that I'm getting invalid responses when it's invalid. Make sure I get a valid response when it is, for just basic, looks like basic authentication right here and something like this. And then all of these tests for the leaf data thing are run with this wrapper script. It looks for its directory, has some little test runners that we do when we want a one-off up here, runs the prime set right there, grabs our transform. This is the magic from the XSLT transform right here. It takes this PHP unit report XSLT file and then reads this PHP unit XML file that's the output XML file and transforms it into this HTML file right here. I'm sort of not that excited about the order of the parameters for XSLT proc, but I suppose they'd take a pull request if I felt like breaking the user space for them. And then this just makes a nice little header doc that lands there so that you can, so that looks like something like this. It just shows a page like this with some bootstrap theme because I'm so clever, and links to a bunch of the stuff that, if you were looking at one of those files, you might care about. And then another set right here. This was a mistake I had made earlier that I need to point at two file trees for you guys to see what I'm talking about here. Yeah, this ought to do it. Take a look at this file tree here. We've got a bunch of directories, and I've just prefixed them all with a number so that the tests stay organized. PHP Unit is going to run them in the order that it sees them if you just point PHP Unit to this directory where all these test cases exist. Like there's a little bit of magic from PHP Unit. It'll recurse through the directories looking for files that end with test, and then of course when it finds one and it has a class and it has functions on that class that are called test something or other, it's going to run each of those in the order that it finds them. Looks like in the file as near as I can tell, but you could, you know, I guess try it and see on your own. It looks that way to me. So we have all of these different tests that we had to run against this Leaf data system for basic stuff in and out of the system, and then actually some workflows in the system right there. Tried to be pretty organized right there. B2B and transfer is a naming collision that we need to tidy up on this one, but that's for B2B sales, and B2C for B2C sales. And you can see there's another legacy naming collision right there. And we've got similar structures, you know, for stuff like BioTrack and stuff like Metric. And we end up setting up a PHP Unit config file for each of those environments, and then each of those environments ends up with a test wrapper. So if you were, you know, had a scenario with 3 different larger logical test groups, it might be handy to write those with a wrapper, and then hey, put another wrapper around that to run all of them all at once at this, in a long sequence right there. So that's kind of fun with that one. When it has those directories, you can see from one of those outputs here, it doesn't have any of these things grouped, and that XSLT that we were looking at is supposed to group them all, but I broke it, and this is just recursing through the directory to find all of these classes and tests to run. But that's where there's this thing called test suites, and earlier I thought, oh, I don't need test suites, that's silly, and I can just use the magic naming of the directories, but it turns out that was actually not the right idea, and I regret that decision now, so I have to go back and correct my work to just say, to point all of these to those clever directories that I had made earlier. None of these are actually going to work because these are not the real names in here, since I've also spent a bunch of time reorganizing the product, the directory of all of these ones. They exist right here. 1, 2, 3, da, 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 da. I wanted it to do by magic as it was going to find all of these things, and as it turns out, you don't actually have to name them all with test at the end if you have a nice set of test suites and a thing like this that points at a directory, and then it'll recurse into that directory and find the stuff in there and run them in the order that it finds them, of course, file, glob, pattern. But this will then, when we change this and actually start using this, which is going to take some time, then the output of these test results is grouped together by the by these test suite names that we've given here, and we can give them nice friendly names instead of an ugly name that's just pulled right out of the class file. Thanks.